You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
We're back for one more episode with Dr. Jennifer Noonan. Great to have you back.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So that's great, the different ways you're able to work this in with your teaching, and I know you've also done some writing. Didn't your husband, Ben, and you can collaborate on a journal article? I think, was it with Paul Overland?
Right.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we had kind of tested his textbook with him for him, and so we collaborated first at an SBL panel,
right,
talking about that, and then that was developed into an article on teaching communicatively.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I know you all collaborated with Dr. Dallaire to edit this book for your professor, who's your supervisor, right?
That's
Stephen
correct.
Kaufman.
That's
yes.
correct.
And you've got a chapter on here that draws from your research.
Right.
And then you did this.
Yes. Yes.
Please tell us more about this book and how this, and I noticed this isn't just Hebrew, this is for biblical studies.
That's right. That's right. So in thinking about how do we get this out and how do we really get buy-in for people who are a bit skeptical, how do we train people to use these more communicative approaches? How do we, and the long-term goal is, I'd like to write a textbook, but I don't want to have to write a whole teacher's manual to go with it.
Right.
So this is the teacher's manual, but also just to inform the community, to kind of bridge these two disciplines.
Yes.
Where, we've got second language people doing Spanish and French, and we've got biblical studies people who don't know what the research is over here. And so trying to inform the people teaching the ancient languages what's going on in second language acquisition. And so I just kind of distilled what I see as some of the most important principles that SLA is teaching us right now,
right,
what we can learn from SLA. It briefly explain that principle and then explain why we want to use it for the biblical languages, and with a few examples of how you might use it. So at the end of each chapter, there's an example for Hebrew, there's an example for Greek, there's an example for Latin of how you might take that principle and apply it to one of those languages.
Excellent. And you can get this from Glossa House. It's a wonderful read. You've got it laid out very well and very practical. But I was going to ask you, what is your go-to answer for people that they look at this at first? They hear second language acquisition. They say ancient texts. They say, great, German, French, Spanish. Those are modern languages. People use those. People speak them. They communicate with them. But what do you say when they say, this is dead? We don't communicate with this text anymore.
But we do. Reading is an act of communication. And absolutely, the principles are the same. And just because we're primarily reading doesn't mean we don't need to hear it, because reading is subvocalization, where even if you're not audibly reading out loud, your brain is still hearing the language. And so you need to get that auditory input to help you read. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. And so, yes, it is communication. Yes, the auditory component, it is necessary. There's so much of it that it's not its own thing. It is more analogous to Spanish and French, even though we're only reading. So yes, we may not find ourselves in a conversation with someone in person in biblical Hebrew, but we're having a conversation with the text. And that's part of what exegesis is trying to understand what that person is telling us.
Historically and classically, too, texts were often read. I mean, the default was to read them aloud, right? Whether you're in a small group, maybe even by yourself, or maybe you don't. In some cultures, maybe you didn't actually have your own copy, but you were accessing it by someone else reading. So,
right, silent reading is a modern innovation. Yes,
right. So it's a good excuse to get in and enjoy the wordplay and these things you can pick up on too. Excellent. So your book deals with not only Hebrew, but also with Greek and with Latin, and you've got chapters on brief history of modern linguistics and language teaching, different building blocks, implicit knowledge, explicit knowledge, automaticity. Now that implicit knowledge, is that what you gain when you are doing more of the immersion and second language informed approaches?
Right. That's more what we would call acquisition if we were to contrast that with language, learning about a language. The explicit is more learning about a language.
Where we learn the grammar rules and those things.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And that's more of a deductive sort of, you learn this is how it works, and then let's go to specific examples. Right. But and you're not against explicit knowledge, but just the natural order of getting into the language.
Right. And explicit knowledge really informs us more for accuracy, whereas the implicit knowledge brings in the automaticity and fluency and the feel for the language. You just know that you know. You don't know how you know. You don't know how it got in there, but it's there and you can use it.
Right. The child picks up long before they learn the actual grammar rules. They learn pretty early. He didn't go to the store.
Right.
Right. When we use the language enough. Excellent. So much in here on different types of input and total physical response. Does that include acting things out?
Oh,
as
absolutely.
Part of the pedagogy?
Absolutely. Yes. And the whole value of total physical response, or TPR, is that you're giving them input, but because it's, especially early on, they don't have enough that they can talk back to you.
Right.
So they respond with action. So you tell them, go to the door, sit down, stand up, and they do it, demonstrating that they've comprehended it. And so that allows you to provide them with a rich, comprehensible input, and they're not just passively going, right. But they're demonstrating that they know it, they understand it, and that they're doing something with it.
Right. Now, when we talk about integrating these different aspects of second language acquisition, is there anything that is part and parcel of the traditional grammar translation type approach that you would say, now, even though we're doing this, we still want to keep these sorts of activities in our pedagogy, even from the beginning? Right.
I would say vocabulary. The way we do vocabulary in the traditional approach, I think, would match very well with what the second language acquisition experts would say. So in terms of vocabulary, first of all, is more explicit knowledge. You're making a direct, I know that's a house, and I know the word for house is this. That is more explicit knowledge. Vocabulary by nature is just more explicit. And so the intentional memorization, that goes a long way. I wouldn't stop there, but certainly flashcards, they say that's still one of the best ways for learning vocabulary.
Right.
So that's one thing I would definitely bring in from the traditional approach.
Do you find with flashcards, does it make a substantial difference for students if they handwrite it versus using electronic ones or pre-printed ones?
You get at least one more exposure if you're doing the handwriting yourself. But some would say even in the act of writing, it's deepening your awareness and so on of the word. Right. It's not to say that an electronic flashcard is bad or it's worse or, whatever, but you at least get that additional exposure and additional sitting with the word when you make your own.
Right. What about using the words in terms of in context and things like that with the vocabulary? Is that part of the second language? Like,
yes.
Take that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I said, don't stop with the flashcards.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Move on. And yes, learn them in context. If you can learn them, the recommended amount of vocabulary you need to know for a text in order to read it and comprehend it, but also learn vocabulary from it, is 95 to 98% of the vocabulary. In other words, if you have a text and you know 95 to 98% of the words in that text, you can acquire the other 2 to 5%. If you know fewer than that, you're going to struggle and you're less likely to understand it, and you're less likely to gain new vocabulary from it. But it is a great way for learning vocabulary if you can get in that sweet spot.
Right. So you would take, like, where some classes might take your vocab and you've got a big list that you've got in here, you would be getting that acquisition in place by connecting it, by using those words. If you're introducing a verb, then we're going to be giving commands in that verb or describing what we did with that verb, or seeing pictures of
Right.
and
Yes.
so forth, right?
Yes.
And that
Yes.
would be probably a lot more intentional in those things. So yeah,
Yeah. Great.
very good. Well, this is exciting, and I got to get into a little bit of instruction, received a little bit of instruction in these ways at conferences and at some other resources that have been produced. And I found from going from a more grammar translation type of approach to that, it only just opened up new avenues of understanding and led to greater reading fluency and things like that.
Yes.
So I've benefited from these greatly. I've had some conversations with people at times, though, especially with resurgence of interest in our age, for example, in classical learning and getting back to classical techniques. And I know there are some Hebrew professors that think that a grammar translation method in particular is the classical way to learn. This is the way people learned it in this certain era, so that's how we should learn it. What would you say to that? Would you have any pushback on that kind of idea that that's the way people learn languages?
I would say, well, that goes back as far as like the Middle Ages, but there's an earlier way and probably a more natural way for learning language, and that is just through speaking and listening. That came a long time before the Latin classicists of the Middle Ages. So.
Right. So the SLA things are just discovering or rediscovering sort of new, old things.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and really honing in on how do we do it naturally best, and let's draw on that.
Right. And again, nothing to prevent once you get that in place to go on and to study, the philology and the things
absolutely.
like that a lot more intensely in the grammar. But as far as just dropping people off in the deep end of that for the first exposure to language,
it's painful.
It is, and I think many drown.
Yeah.
A few folks that really think that way,
right?
Do well, but
right.
Yeah.
And the people who go on who started that way and didn't drown, they're like, well, of course, that's how I learned it, so that's how everyone should learn it, but.
Right. That's something we all have to be careful of.
Right.
And, not everybody's built like the person in the mirror. That's right. Well, when it comes to, I think you definitely have demonstrated the value with your research and your experience, and I enjoyed talking with you today about these things. Are there some things that somebody is watching or listening and they think, man, I want to get in on this, but I know there is an explosion of resources now. I'm not really sure where to start. Are there some starting points that you would suggest for someone who's maybe picking up either the biblical languages or Latin for the first time, something that you would point them to?
Yeah, one of my favorite, if you're just starting to learn the language yourself, my go-to would be Aleph with Beth and Alpha with Angela. I just think they're great pedagogically, but they're also a lot of fun.
Yes.
and really accessible. They're free. They're YouTube videos that are 10 to 15 minutes long, and you can just start learning, like with your inner child.
Yes.
or an actual child. It's a lot more fun if you bring them in.
Bring your children in if you have children. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So that, I think, is a great place to start. But also Glossa House, that's their thing. They do, so just peruse their website for various resources, everything from books to now a podcast and so on, that I think are really helpful. A whole variety of things, and from different, if you want to study the Book of Ruth, you've got a picture book for Ruth, or whatever it is.
Yes. And you've got a podcast with them, the SLA Insights.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
And I've shared that on this program before, and certainly want to point you guys there. That's part of my Monday morning routine, is to watch Dr. Jennifer Noonan on SLA Insights. That's really neat. A lot of great resources that folks can jump into, and certainly second your recommendations on Alpha with Angela and Aleph with Beth, and these other things. Guys, look into these. Get into these things. What about up and coming, things that maybe aren't available yet, things on the horizon that you're especially excited for in these veins?
Yeah. So first, my dissertation will finally be published this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you, through Glossa House. Also, my husband's work with Zondervan, he's doing Hebrew Grammar Beyond the Basics, the companion for the Greek from Wallace. Okay. Which it's just going to be a great resource. I get the privilege of reading chapters as they're being written, so it's going to be very good. And then also one resource that's coming out through Hebrew Higher Education, hopefully this coming year, at SBL conference this past fall, the National Association of Professors of Hebrew sponsored a session that was exclusively on comprehensible input for Hebrew. And so I had the privilege of presenting the more theoretical background for that. But then the presenters that came after me gave some very practical and engaging examples of how to do this in the classroom. So the one did first semester Hebrew, one did second semester Hebrew, and the other did an example for second year Hebrew. And so that set of presentations will be coming out as articles in Hebrew Higher Education.
Excellent.
Coming this year. So
you look for that. That's online. That's open access. You can download those for free. So yeah, keep an eye on Hebrew Higher Education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. And then Glossa House just continues to be putting out these resources like Kids Book on body vocabulary, or things like that. So keep checking the Glossa House website.
Right. Now, can we use those in adult instruction classes? Is that okay?
Yes, please. Yes.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the program today, Jen. As we close, any final words of encouragement to students, to teachers, just practical tips, words of wisdom, anything?
Yes. First, to students, the biblical languages are hard, okay? Everybody thinks they're hard. Don't get discouraged. We're looking for ways to make it better, but keep at it and keep going, because it is so worth it. It just opens up this world of the Bible that you don't get in an English translation. So persevere, keep at it. And if your current instructor is not plugging into these things, the more communicative stuff, go for it yourself. Go look for these resources. There's so many that are out there that are free, that are available to help you out. So do it and persevere. It's worth it. And then for teachers, this is a great time to be teaching the ancient languages, because there has been this explosion in interest and energy for all these resources that are coming out, and availability, and people to ask questions of, and examples to follow, and so on. So if you're looking to do some of this stuff, I would say try it. Start small, start with what you're comfortable with, and next time around add more, and just keep working at it. And there are, like I said, so many more resources available to you to do that.
Excellent. So don't try to do it all at once, right?
Right.
That was one thing I really appreciated about your book, incremental changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Now, I do have a friend who would say, jump in with both feet. And if you're ready to jump in with both feet, do it. But if you're not, it's okay to do it one step at a time.
Excellent. Well, I hope you all will do that, and I hope this has been a helpful episode for you. It's been just extremely valuable, Jen. Thank you again, Dr. Noonan. It's been a privilege to have you on the show today.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for asking.